Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Thank you
Good
for
morning, good
joining.
afternoon.
We will be maybe waiting for 1 minute for all participants to get connected and then get started. So for those who are already connected, just to let you know that you can ask your question in the chat, and we will be happy to answer them at the end of this presentation. So do not hesitate to post your question while we are passing the slides and commenting.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Maybe another minute and then we should be able to get started. Okay, shall we start?
Let's go. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so welcome to all participants to this new episode of our webinar, Technopolitics. We will be today talking about OpenAI for countries and targeting one specific issue, which is sovereignty or strategic dependency, which is a key question. Before entering in the details, I just introduce myself as well as Damien. So my name is Marine Champon. I'm the founder and director of consultancy on risk and crisis management, working on these issues either for companies or for international organizations as the EU or World Bank in several countries. So my main focus is really on geopolitical risk, and I will be happy to introduce this geopolitical landscape on this issue just after Damien introduces himself. So I'm based in Paris and working basically in EU, but also in Africa, Middle East.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Damien. I'm Managing Director at Reboot Up, a boutique consultancy firm based in Singapore, focused on technical advisory and focused on AI and data strategies in particular, with a focus on building sovereign solutions and sovereign infrastructures for my clients. Very happy to be here, and I'll hand it over for Marine to get started.
Thanks, Damien. So first of all, I will, before Damien enters in more specific details about what it means in several countries and what it means, of course, for your companies, just to give you this geopolitical landscape of what we're talking about when we talk about AI sovereignty. Basically, the main issue is that geopolitics is not an annexed issue, but really an imperative and not a technical preference. So you have here some figures that are quite interesting, just to make this global AI landscape, which is, as you see, asymmetric and bipolar. 70% of leading AI models are from the United States, 25% from China. So you see that there is two huge countries who are basically all this, basically the main leaders of all this landscape, with only the rest of the world representing 5% of this model development. What does it mean? Well, this concentration creates really a strategic dependency dynamic, and countries are all evaluating how they can handle this dependency on external actors for compute models and high-level AI capabilities. So AI is now treated as infrastructure and not only software. and it's really shaping the economical, national resilience, political influence issues. So you see, it's a really key driver. The question for states, therefore, is no longer should we adopt AI, but really how do we avoid to be being strategically subordinated within the AI value chain. So this question of sovereignty is the geopolitical response for this to answer this landscape of global concentration on these issues. Other figures which are quite interesting is the social and political demand on sovereignty. You see here some figures about how citizens consider this question of sovereignty. They basically, 80% of them across US, Europe, and Japan, which is a survey we focused on, say that technological sovereignty is important or very important for them. And public opinion is shifting rapidly, and in most countries, this importance is increasing and has increased a lot over the last year. Also because, as you may all have seen in all days, there is this question of this struggle between China and US about all these issues around AI that are really leading the debate. Well, on another hand, citizens are quite pragmatic. 50% are comfortable using foreign technology, but if they found that safeguards exist, and a majority say they're willing to pay more for sovereign alternatives. So interesting to see that it's not only an issue that is handled by economic or political actors, but really by citizens themselves. The response in Europe to this question is prioritizing data protection, jurisdictional control, and autonomy on critical system. Europe being between US and China and trying to find his way. So the emerging technopolitical fracture is the following. Governments, as you see, are weaponizing infrastructure choices. China has banned foreign AI chips from state-funded data centers. The export controls on minerals is really used as a policy lever. And the national investment in sovereign compute is accelerating in all the regions that are not leading this landscape as US and China. On the other hand, cloud providers and AI vendors are also reorganizing around this question of sovereignty, with Microsoft enabling local copyleft processing in 15 countries, Google Cloud creating a European advisory board for regional governance, and Red Hat launching also EU-only sovereign support models. So all providers and vendors are also reorganizing, taking into consideration this technopolitical and geopolitical fracture. So this is the politicization, as you can understand, of this digital infrastructure. And Damien will enter in the detail of that, but data allocation is no longer a compliance checkbox, but it's really a strategic position and in a global competition. And this, of course, targets a lot your companies and the countries where you're based.
Thank you, Marine. So we'll deep dive a bit into now what is OpenAI for countries specifically, and what are some of these initiatives that are being deployed across the globe, with the idea and the intent from many nations across the globe, in fact, to build some form of sovereign AI infrastructure, recognizing that it is important from a national agenda perspective, from a military perspective, from a democracy perspective, and economic perspective as well. So the promise from OpenAI as part of their OpenAI for Countries offering is to enable some form of sovereignty, and we'll see how it can be perceived as such, and what are some of the limitations of that. Local compute, AI that can be locally managed, data residency, obviously, so data and infrastructure being in country, with I guess subject to local policies and local regulation as well. Models potentially customizable or tailored for government needs, and I guess it's seen and being sold to countries as democratic AI rails in that sense. So interesting positioning. What we'll see now is what are the countries that have embraced OpenAI for countries. The UAE was one of the first one. As a first iteration, if you remember, the so-called Stargate initiative that was US-based initially for a $500 billion investment announced by the Trump administration back in January. This is the closest and second replica of that Stargate initiative in the UAE, and it's based on Oracle, NVIDIA, and OpenAI specifically as being the key providers of that tech stack. The UK, I think, came second with, I guess, another kind of full stack here, provided mostly by, again, US companies, and OpenAI, obviously here specifically providing the large language model. Argentina is the first one in LATAM. Now, for Japan and South Korea, they are right now, they are not deployed and agreed upon. They are blueprints, and they are effectively strategies that OpenAI has crafted with the idea, obviously, to be able to sell OpenAI their model and their infrastructure, I guess the partner infrastructure as well in the countries. So for OpenAI, obviously, it's a way to monetize their large language model in a way that countries are self-contained within each country. But we'll see there are limitations, obviously, from a so-called sovereignty or dependency perspective that results from this offering. So again, today there are 5. There are more discussions ongoing across the globe. OpenAI is very aggressive to try to promote and sell and commercialize their model. And when they usually go with some of the other US infrastructure providers. So again, the Oracle, the NVIDIA, and others. Some countries have a bit more of an existing sovereign infrastructure and local players who can play in. But again, the UAE is a good example of a fully owned US-based technology for the entire tech stack. So what it does, if you look at what this offering really does from a what's truly an advantage and a strength from a sovereignty perspective, obviously it gives access to these nations to the top frontier model in the world as well, without having obviously to invest in building an LLM from scratch. The infrastructure that comes with it, as you know, running large language model at a certain scale is extremely compute heavy and energy intensive. So having this full stack ready is certainly appealing. There are certain customizations OpenAI has agreed to do for some countries to support certain languages or policy guardrails. So it fits some of, I guess, the values and the local policies for these nations. And generally, obviously, and the UAE is probably a good example, they are trying to be a local AI hub for the region, but by building this massive infrastructure, being effectively the most modern and the most advanced, they're hoping to continue to be a key differentiation in the region and be a hub for the region for other countries to come and leverage that infrastructure and that know-how locally, right? So these are really some of the pros about what OpenAI has to offer. Now, obviously, there are some dependencies. Again, when we talk about sovereignty, and we'll see that in more detail, it's really about managing your dependencies, being aware of where and what kind of dependencies you're ready to accept, whether you're a nation or whether you are a business, what is acceptable for you and what creates a weakness or effectively resilience. So here, obviously, the IP of the model itself, the intellectual property, but also the weights is the secret sauce here. OpenAI are not being disclosed. It continue to belong to OpenAI, and nations have no influence, no control over that. The chips, underlying chips, would be mostly NVIDIA. Obviously, no real control over that either. Still subject to US laws. You might know that the Cloud Act stipulates that the Department of Justice, under certain condition, can subpoena any data based on that is hosted by a US-owned server anywhere in the world. So for all these nations who are leveraging on Oracle infrastructure, for example, but also the public cloud, as long as it's a US-based company, would be subject to the Cloud Act, as well as potential sanctions. So that extraterritorial aspect is very important when you get into this kind of solution, because that's a huge dependency that could really play against some of these nations. And obviously, the concept of kill switch, right? If the entire infrastructure, the update cycles, the maintenance, the know-how is effectively still owned by these US companies, they could technically decide to stop all that, which makes, again, all these countries fully dependent on the US goodwill, if we may say it this way, to continue to support them. So again, there's a pros and cons. It's actually really, really interesting. And there's actually a wider study here to look at how countries are looking at sovereignty in many aspects, OpenAI for countries being one, but there are other initiatives out there that also have some form of dependencies and certain level of risk as well. So what it means, if you look at what true sovereignty would really mean in theory, and I say really in theory because it's really, really hard to achieve unless you own this entire stack you see here on the slide, right? From model weights, which means you own the IP and it's your own model, the compute itself, contracts, encryption keys, energy, full energy independence, and potentially apps with full source code, as well as I guess the ability to change and change the tech stack. So true sovereignty would be hard to achieve for most countries. I would say the two who can claim I guess quasi sovereignty would be US and China, because they own most of the entire AI value chain. But even then, there are some interdependencies, right? Whether it's rare earth minerals, whether it's the semiconductors or the chip manufacturing, mostly owned by Taiwan, the lithographic equipment by ASML in Europe, and the processing of rare earth minerals by China in particular. So all of this is quite intertwined, and no one can really claim full independence anyways. Like when you're relying then on certain vendors based on to create your infrastructure, there'll be limitation on what how sovereign you can be in that sense, right? So what you get here with this OpenAI for Countries initiative, you'll get local compute, you get data residency, you get local support, you can deploy locally, and you can still support local policies, right? So it's actually still good and powerful. However, again, you don't get full control and depend on some key dependencies on the model itself. So the weights we mentioned here, part of a large language model configuration, if you'd like, and obviously GPU, as well as version control and generally support here, right? So these are key dependencies that are and remain front and center for any countries adopting the OpenAI based solution. Now, we also have to be quite realistic. I mentioned before, full sovereignty, meaning no dependency and full autarky, is just not desirable, not even possible today. But they are also interesting consideration to keep in mind, because even if you were to be absolute in your definition of sovereignty, you'll realize that it creates a conflict. And the conflict is being sovereign may mean I need to concentrate my compute, my storage, my network, And when you concentrate, you remove redundancies, and redundancies is a way to build resilient system. So if you say data localization, for example, you want everything to be in country, well, that's great. But if something happens to your country somehow, then not having that redundancy outside becomes also a risk. In fact, in South Korea, there was a government data center fire that actually destroyed the data center, at least a few servers in the data center, and they lost, I think, 8 terabytes of data with no recovery because there was no redundancy, right? So yes, it is good to be sovereign. It is good to have some level of control and contain where your architecture and how your architecture is deployed, but there are trade-offs, right? Same with local support. You could say, well, if I want my team to be, let's say, in the data center with me and work, and you require 24/7 support. The way it's done today from an IT servicing perspective is you have usually teams across the globe who are doing 24/7 because you can use and leverage the different time zone to do that. But that means what? It means you have a team in another jurisdiction accessing your system so they can support you, right? So that's resilient from an operational perspective, but it creates security risk or sovereignty risk having, again, teams or vendors in other jurisdiction accessing your systems. Same for talent concentration. If you just want to hire locals because that's the way for you to be sovereign, you may miss out on global expertise, right? So it limits, again, your ability to compete on the global stage. Same for network security. Again, redundancy is a lever for resilience, and sovereignty is calling for concentration. So you see the tension here. It's not that simple, and every company will have a different footprint and different requirements based on how they operate, based on what is sensitive, and based on the level of resilience they need on some of their business process and where they operate in the world. So some of the questions we need to ask ourselves as we are in the position to build out and decide on how to create a more resilient AI infrastructure overall, and the positions that leaders have been into when they were confronted by OpenAI's offering, but also many other offerings out there in different configuration. You would have heard different initiative across the globe where every country has effectively made different decisions and different choices depending on the partners they work with. And that is, I think, a sign of where they see their risks. And some are ready to accept full stack US-based technology. Some are trying to limit as much as possible. China is the prime example of full decoupling and building a parallel track, a parallel ecosystem from the US to be fully decoupled and independent, which is very costly and difficult. And then you have most countries in the middle are trying to kind of hybrid version of that, trying to get what they can, best of both worlds when they can, or some duplication or redundancies when they can. So if you think about, is my infrastructure sovereign enough for me, for my business? You'll want to ask yourself some of these questions, right? Who has the kill switch? What happens if it's actually being used, and on which part of my infrastructure? What part of my business does it impact? What if I don't get updates from the large language model? I don't get new updates. I don't get new versions. Can I exit from my relationship with my cloud provider? What does it cost me to exit this kind of contract? Is my application, my system lift and shift and fully reversible? Can I actually port it over to another provider easily, or is it extremely costly? Who holds the encryption keys of my data? Is it my service provider who can be subpoenaed under the Cloud Act, or is it myself, right? This is super important as well. So you see these questions really targeted to, although they sound fairly simple, they create prospective scenarios to think about to see how robust your digital infrastructure is when it comes down to geopolitical pressure that could be applied to your business. So I'll continue with I guess what can be done, right, from a business perspective. Beyond the questions, there are a few areas, and there are examples here of things that can be done to help to help mitigate some of these externalities that geopolitics today impose on nations and businesses around the world. So it goes from some form of decoupling in certain areas of your infrastructure. It goes with more sovereign aware data architecture where your data is effectively it resides actually in the right jurisdictions. On your AI model, so algorithm governance as well, where and what model you use across what jurisdiction, and the type of vendor you want to work with, depending on again where they are, what they can access, and whether it's risk or an exposure for you. So again, some examples here of possible mitigation, and they're not necessarily black or white solutions. I want to be clear; they are mitigations because full decoupling, again, is probably not desirable, not even possible in many instances. So important to keep that in mind. So I'll finish a bit on that. This is the framework we're using with our clients to help look at the risk level and the resilience level of a digital infrastructure and the impact on the business operations and the ability for the business to sustain, I would say, the geopolitical turmoil that it's exposed to. So map your dependencies, understand all the dependencies that you have across your digital infrastructure. Look at the kind of exposure you have, build prospective and stress test scenarios to understand what will break, should a new event, geopolitical event, affect your business, export controls, new sanctions, or the so-called kill switch, a bit as an extreme case. So design for resilience from day one, and that means starting to plan out architecture changes and vendor selection that will help to build that resilience into your business. Monitor some of these key indicators, and importantly, from a governance perspective, raise this at the highest level, because business resilience is, in the end, a C-suite and a board level conversation. So I'll finish on that and conclude on that. If there are any questions, either in the chat, in the chat, if you guys want to post a few questions here, feel free to do so. As a next step, as always, we'll be sharing the recording as well as the material you have seen here via email in the next few hours. And again, happy to connect and stay in touch if you have any questions or want to deep dive a bit further in some of the points we raised today. Thanks for your attention, and let me know if you have any questions. Hey, right on time. It's not too bad. 3 minutes for questions.
If you have some questions, if you have no question now, but some question after a webinar, do not hesitate to send an email to Damien or myself, and we will be happy to answer.
Sounds good. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I assume we were extremely clear. But seriously, I will be sending an email. Just respond to my email if and when you have some questions or want to get a bit more information. I think we should be good to go then, right on time. We'll give you 2 minutes back of your time. Thank you so much for attending today. Super appreciate it. And that will be our last for the year. So we wish you a nice end of year and happy holidays for this year end.
Thanks, Damien. Thanks a lot for attending. And same then, Damien. Have a very nice time till the end of the year.
Thank you so much. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.